In 300 BCE, the Mediterranean world had two growing powers. Rome, a city-state whose land armies had already unified the Italian peninsula, and Carthage, a Phoenician city-state in North Africa that dominated the sea and grew rich on trade, including ties to the silver mines of Spain. As these two powers grew stronger, it seemed inevitable that they would clash. In 264, the two city-states came to blows over who would control the Sicilian city of Messana, located on the strait between Sicily and the boot tip of Italy. This confrontation began the first of three hostile encounters between Rome and Carthage, called the Punic Wars. Punicus was the Latin word for Phoenician, by which the Romans recalled the origins of the Carthaginians. In 241 BCE, Rome won a decisive sea battle against Carthage, and the First Punic War ended with a Roman victory. Rome received control of Sicily and a large financial indemnity from the Carthaginians. But the larger question of who would control the Western Mediterranean remained unresolved. A second war seemed inevitable. Since Rome now controlled the sea lanes, Carthaginian leaders knew that the next war would have to come on land, and the staging area for that war had to be through Spain. In addition, Carthage needed Spain's rich silver mines to fund future wars. To accomplish this, they sent their best general, Hamilcar Barca, to Spain. Hamilcar marshaled many of Carthage's sturdy merchant ships to cross to Spain with a formidable force. Hamilcar brought large numbers of infantry, cavalry, and fierce war elephants, the tanks of the ancient warfare. It isn't clear where he landed. He could have sailed through the Strait of Gibraltar to land at Cadiz, the sheltered port used by peaceful Phoenician merchants. Or he could have landed at the best harbor in the Western Mediterranean, modern Cartagena. I favor the Cartagena theory because it was a closer sail from North Africa. I picture frightened elephants stomping during rough sea crossings. Either way, we know that Hamilcar rebuilt the sleepy port on Spain's southeast coast, and he named it New Carthage, Carthago Nova, which is where we get the modern name Cartagena. Archaeologists have found remains of the walls of the Carthaginians built to protect this valuable port. Once established on the Iberian Peninsula, Hamilcar fought local tribes and secured the silver mines. The famous old general had brought his son-in-law, Hasdrubal the Fair, and his 9-year-old son, Hannibal, with him. And these two learned the art of war with their father and became even more famous than he was. In 228, Hamilcar died fighting tribes in Spain. In time, young Hannibal took over his father's command, and almost 10 years later, the Second Punic War broke out in earnest. Here was the problem. After the First Punic War, Rome and Carthage divided Spain into two spheres of influence. Rome controlled everything north of the Ebro River, and Carthage everything south. However, south of the Ebro, near today's town of Sagunto, in the province of Valencia, lay a highly fortified Celto-Iberian town called Saguntum, which traded with Greek and Phoenician colonists along the coast, and which was prosperous and independent. Saguntum had traditionally allied with Rome and was unwilling to change allegiance to Carthage. So, in 219, the young general Hannibal besieged the city. He could not leave such a fortified city at his back if he was going to march north, so he surrounded it. The siege took 8 months, but the city fell, and with its fall, the Second Punic War began. Hannibal gathered his formidable army at Cadiz, along with his war elephants and a large cohort of Celto-Iberian mercenaries, and made a generous sacrifice to the Carthaginian god Melkart, whose great temple still stood on the heights overlooking the strait. He then moved north in his famous journey across the Pyrenees and the Alps to attack Rome itself. He lost many of his troops and most of his elephants in the high passes, but he emerged into Italy with enough of an army to cause havoc up and down the peninsula for years, while Rome came up with a general and a strategy to defeat him. Part of Rome's plan was to attack the Carthaginian lands in Spain, so Iberia once again became a battlefield, while Hannibal marched in Italy. Hannibal had left a small force in Spain, but it was not enough when Rome decided to bring the war to Iberia. Rome sent a brilliant general, Scipio. Scipio began the attack on Carthage in Spain when, in 211, he landed at the mouth of the Ebro and quickly marched south to mount a surprise attack on New Carthage. As he collected the tribute from his victory, Scipio enhanced his reputation for justice when he was presented with a spectacularly beautiful woman as his prize. When he discovered that she was betrothed to a Celtiberian chieftain, he returned her unharmed to her fiancé. Whether this story is true or not, it exemplifies what people thought of this general, and he won over many local chieftains as he marched against the local Carthaginian armies. In 206, Scipio won a decisive victory over the Carthaginian forces in the Battle of Ilipa that took place on a plain near Sevilla. In the aftermath of this battle, the Romans took the major cities of the south, including the all-important Cadiz and the neighboring mines. With Spain at least nominally secured, Scipio returned to Rome in triumph and was assigned the leadership of an army to sail to North Africa, taking the war to Carthage itself. Hannibal was forced to abandon Italy to sail back to Carthage to defend the city. Scipio decisively defeated Hannibal at the Battle of Zama in 202 BCE and won the surname Africanus to commemorate his great victory. Carthage sued for peace, giving up Spain to Rome. Spain now entered into a new stage that shaped its identity more than any other. The Romans entered Spain to defeat Carthage, but they were quick to recognize the value of the resources and location of the peninsula. They moved in and made Iberia solidly part of their empire. They renamed the peninsula Hispania, which is where we get the name Spain, and transformed the region in ways that endure today. The Romans spoke Latin, and as soldiers, merchants, and bureaucrats moved in, that became the language of the peninsula. Modern Spanish is simply Latin that over time drifted first into a dialect, then a separate language. Most of the old languages of the peninsula died out. Iberian is forgotten, for example. Basque survived in the mountains, but it's unique. Other regions, like Galicia, preserve some Celtic words, even as they learned Latin like the rest of the peninsula. One key to Roman rule in Spain lay in the towns and cities that linked the provinces together. Rome took over the existing thriving cities like Cartagena, Cadiz, and Empurias and joined them into a larger network. Now, instead of being independent, these cities were joined by Roman roads and were responsible to Roman tax collectors and administrators. And by seeing themselves as part of a larger entity, cities started to work more closely together in trade and policy decisions. Spain was becoming a political entity instead of a collection of prosperous cities. The Romans also created new towns, often by offering land to retired and disabled Roman soldiers. And these towns were called colonies, whose inhabitants were Roman citizens, bringing their own strong culture to Spain. The oldest Roman settlement in Iberia was established during the Second Punic War, when Scipio charged his soldiers with building a fortified city in the northwest to guard the passes through the Pyrenees. They built Taraco, modern Tarragona in Catalonia, which in 2000 became a UNESCO World Heritage Site for its Roman ruins. The city remained a centrally important fortified place where Roman armies based during the winter and from which they resupplied themselves during warfare. The city is on a strategic hilltop, and its walls remain impressive today. Since Tarraco was only 5 days from Rome by sea, it formed a strategic link to Italy. It also had a road link to the Ebro Valley, which gave it quick access to the interior of Spain. As early as 206 BCE, Romans established another colony of veterans in a new town of Italica near Sevilla. This town prospered for 400 years and was the reputed birthplace of the Roman emperors Trajan and Hadrian. The city must have been impressive. It had an amphitheater that held 25,000 spectators and great temples and markets. Its ruins remain a popular tourist destination today, but this was only one of many successful colonies. Some colonies were established near existing cities, which made them grow and enter the larger Roman community. The small town of Augusta, known today as Mérida, on the Guadiana River in western Spain, grew enormously and became a provincial capital. Mérida has some of the best preserved Roman ruins in Spain, including a bridge, forum, amphitheater, and a large circus for chariot racing. As we will see, this city would remain centrally important for centuries. In the southwest, Rome took over the old Atlantic town of Cadiz and made her a prosperous piece of their economy. Not only did it provide access to the mines, which Rome expanded impressively, as I will discuss in a bit, but it was also key to the prosperous fishing industry. The Atlantic is a rich source of fish, but of course, the problem with fish is how to preserve it so it can last for long-distance trade. In modern times, Spain is noted for canning fish for export, but the Romans developed other ways to export this valuable commodity. The first method of preservation was to salt fish. Freshly caught fish were salted, either whole or filleted and packed in pottery vessels for transport. During the centuries of this growth and prosperity in the province of Spain, the city of Rome had experienced civil wars and in government. Rome was no longer a republic. With the reign of Caesar Augustus that began in 27 BCE, Rome had become an empire. From then on, the prosperous province of Spain was a prize to support emperors and even produce some Spanish emperors, as we saw with Hadrian and Trajan. One example of imperial involvement in the peninsula may be seen in Bailo Claudia, a town along the Atlantic coast just beyond the Pillars of Hercules. In about 50 CE, the Emperor Claudius declared Bailo Claudia a municipium, an official Roman town. By putting this town on Rome's official map, Rome exploited this seaside town that provided the salt for processing the fish and served as a port that would send the fish all over the Roman world. Bailo Claudia prospered for 2 centuries until an earthquake in the 2nd century cut off its access to the interior. The settlement declined after that, but its abandonment allowed modern archaeologists to excavate the most comprehensive remains of a Roman town on the peninsula. The Roman ruins include 3 aqueducts to bring large amounts of water to the industrial processing plants of the wealthy city. Standing among the ruins, visitors can get an idea of the scale of what had been a bustling industrial town and see the coast of Morocco, showing the crucial link between Spain and North Africa. While salt fish sold widely, the real wealth of Bailo Claudia and other coastal cities came from their production of garum, a wildly popular fish sauce that Romans used to flavor all kinds of food. To produce garum, workers filled vats with layers of fish blood and guts with a lot of salt. This concoction was left out in the sun for 1 to 3 months where it fermented. The resulting liquid was skimmed off, mixed with some herbs, and packed into pottery jars and sold all over the Mediterranean. It's impossible to overstate the popularity of garum. You have to imagine replacing soy sauce, ketchup, salsa, and all modern condiments with this one product. Towns all over the Mediterranean produced it, but throughout the empire, garum produced in Spain on the southern coast from Cartagena to Cadiz including Bailo Claudia, was the most popular. Romans couldn't get enough of it, and ships laden with pottery vessels full of it sailed out daily. Anything that was as popular as garum was bound to generate literary references, and some I find great fun. For example, the Hispano-Roman satirist Martial wrote an epigram complimenting a friend who could seduce a woman who had consumed 6 helpings of garum. Presumably, her stomachache didn't deter him. The serious Hispano-Roman Stoic Seneca, on the other hand, warned people against eating too much garum, writing, "Do you not realize that garum, that expensive bloody mass of decayed fish, consumes the stomach with its salted putrefaction?" I admit I haven't tasted it, but it doesn't sound tasty to me. Still, it shows how humans love flavoring in their food. In a world that had no chilies, that would come from the New World, and few spices from Asia, people splashed fermented fish sauce all over their food, and Spain grew rich. So far, I've described how Rome succeeded in conquering, settling, and spreading its culture throughout the east, south, and central portions of the peninsula. The mountainous northwest represented a wholly different story. The independent Celtiberians fought long and hard to resist Roman dominance. Roman historians called the wars against the Celtiberians in the mountainous northwest of Spain the Cantabrian Wars, named after the region they called Cantabria. The Roman historian Lucius Florus described the beginnings of the conflict. In the west, almost all Spain had been subjugated, except that part which adjoins the cliffs where the Pyrenees end and is washed by the nearer waters of the ocean. Here, 2 powerful nations, the Cantabrians and the Asturians, lived in freedom from the rule of Rome. He was right. These Celts were unwilling to allow Rome to enter the mountains, which resulted in a decade of brutal warfare from 29 to 19 BCE. The Celtiberians knew they lacked the numbers to challenge Rome, but the terrain was theirs. They fought a guerrilla war from the tops of mountains as Romans tried to march through the narrow passes. The Celts could also fight from their castra, the hilltop fortresses that had protected them for centuries. Rome committed many resources to this war. Over the 10 years of active battle, they sent many legions, plus their auxilia, or more than 50,000 soldiers. Why were they so determined? It may have been the gold and iron mines in the north. That would have been motivation enough. It may also have been Rome's refusal to lose in a war. They never gave up, and the war dragged on. In the year 26, even Emperor Caesar Augustus came to Spain to conduct this war directly. However, in the midst of the offensive, Augustus fell ill and had to return to Rome. He left his trusted companion Agrippa in charge, and he pursued the war with vigor. Agrippa finally confronted the major Celtiberian army in 19 BCE on the Esla River, a tributary of the Duero River in the northwest. The Romans named this river the Astura, and the region of the Asturias took its name from this river. Agrippa won decisively, and the official war was over. These fierce wars took a devastating toll. The Romans chose not to take prisoners down out of the mountains and killed everyone they found. On their part, the Cantabrians preferred suicide to slavery, and Roman accounts tell of losing armies dying by their own hand with swords or drinking poisoned potions that they carried with them. In spite of the carnage, the Celtiberians never fully resigned themselves to Rome's rule. For 70 more years, Rome had to leave 2 legions, about 10,000 soldiers, in the region to keep the peace. Rome was able to claim and work the mines, but the northwest provinces of Spain remained different from the south, in part because of the resistance to Roman culture. The stucco villages and Roman-style villas in the south gave way to stone farmhouses in the Celtic style in the north. The local people eventually learned Latin, but retained many of their own words and used them as they sang to bagpipes instead of to Roman lyres. Rome divided Hispania into two provinces, nearer and farther Spain, Hispania Citerior and Ulterior. And later, under the empire, it was further subdivided into several provinces. This administrative organization allowed Rome to turn its attention to uniting and exploiting the resources of this province. As they had demonstrated all over the Mediterranean world, Romans were extremely effective as engineers. Efficient Roman roads united their territories and created a unit of Spain, just as the 19th century English created a united India with their railroad lines. Maps of Roman roads show how they effectively joined all parts of the peninsula, even the rebellious Northwest, and linked Spain to the north through passes in the eastern and western parts of the Pyrenees. With these roads, goods, people, and information could pass quickly through the provinces. The roads themselves were marvels of engineering, and they were built to last. In fact, in the late 1970s, when I was driving through rural areas in the northwest of Spain, some of the only roads available were Roman ones built of stone. How did they build these marvels? Roads were built by soldiers who spent more time building and repairing roads than they did fighting. There were about 6,500 miles, 10,500 kilometers of Roman roads throughout Spain. The provincial governor was responsible for maintaining roads, and he insisted that large landowners maintain the repairs across their property, supplementing military workers with their own slaves. The best roads had foundations that went down 1.5 meters deep and were graded so water would run off. The roads were then made up of packed earth, gravel, and finally paved with rectangular blocks of stone. The roads were marked by milestones, stones set deep into the earth each mile and marked with the distance covered. The mile, Latin mille passus, meant 1,000 paces, or 1,481 meters, 4,859 feet. About every 30 miles, the Romans built an inn for travelers to rest before going on their way. Some of these roads, like the Via Domitia that came through the Pyrenees and the Via Augusta that ran along the Mediterranean coast, were famous throughout antiquity. Many of these roads, along with their markers, remain today, and you can see the tracks in stone of the uncountable numbers of carts that traveled along these miracles of ancient engineering. Roman engineers did not let rivers stop them as they built roads to link the peninsula together. Roman bridges remain marvels of engineering, and many are still in use in Spain today. The Roman bridges in Mérida and Córdoba show the characteristics of these Roman structures. Romans developed two innovations for their bridges. They used concrete and built with arches that were strong enough to bear weight as they spanned rivers. By digging down to bedrock and setting the stone there, Romans built their bridges to last. It's stunning to cross bridges that have stood for over 2,000 years. To build the urban centers that Romans loved, they needed to bring water into the towns. The Aqua Appia, the first aqueduct that brought water into Rome itself, was built in 312 BCE, and it is about 10 miles long, including underground pipes and elevated sections. It brought water from about 8 miles outside Rome into a fountain in the Forum. In the centuries following, Romans perfected this design. Later aqueducts used both subterranean pipes and overhead pipes mounted on arches. The overhead aqueducts allowed engineers to manipulate the height of the arches to adjust the slope of the aqueduct to regulate the rate of water flowing through the channel at the top. Rome exported these marvels of engineering to cities throughout the Mediterranean world, including several in Spain. The city of Segovia has a beautifully preserved Roman aqueduct that was built in the 1st century CE. It once brought water from the Rio Frio in the mountains 11 miles into the city walls. The magnificent arches reached 93.5 feet at the highest to control the flow of water into the city. This aqueduct provided water for the city until the 19th century. Roman water engineering like this allowed the dry areas of Spain to flourish, establishing the whole peninsula as a wonderful place to live. The Segovia aqueduct is the best preserved, but travelers can see remnants of the many Roman structures in places like the Rio Seco Valley, Tarragona, and elsewhere. Roman engineering also transformed the mining practices that had existed in Spain since the Bronze Age. When the Romans took over the Rio Tinto mining area in 206 BCE, after defeating the Carthaginians, they transformed the mines. First, the Romans mined the Rio Tinto much deeper than had ever been done before. They dug shafts up to 450 feet deep, which required them to build elaborate ventilation and drainage systems that included wooden water wheels and a system of sloping drainage channels. Because of their endless wars that generated captive slaves, Romans were able to use slave labor to work the mines at a scale unheard of before. Roman sources say that 40,000 slaves worked the silver mines outside Cartagena, and even more worked Rio Tinto. Slaves were chained at the neck and descended into the mine to work 11 hours with only some bread to eat and water to drink. They were given garum to flavor the bread and provide some minerals, but that was all they ate. Their lives were short, and the human bones found in the slag piles show the enslaved miners were thrown out with the garbage. Being condemned to work the mines was a certain death sentence, but there were always more slaves to follow, and Rome's economy was transformed by the mines. The constant supply of fresh metal for minting silver and lower denomination copper-based coins allowed Rome to fund everything from its armies to free grain for Rome's citizen. Indeed, by the empire, all citizens of the city of Rome were entitled to rations of grain and at times olive oil. Rome grew rich, and so did Spain. Spain was a central part of the Roman Empire for some 600 years, from about 200 BCE to about 400 CE. As in most provinces, residents kept both identities, Spanish and Roman, and by the 3rd century, all were granted Roman citizenship. Throughout that time, Spain's position as a crossroad of the Mediterranean was secured. In addition to garum, agricultural goods from olive oil and wine to wheat and wool flowed from Spain into Central Europe, Italy, and to the far eastern Mediterranean. People, too, moved to and from Spain, bringing their influence and ideas. Some of Rome's greatest emperors were from Spain. Trajan and Hadrian, known as the two good emperors, came from Spain, as did Theodosius the Great. Spain also produced the witty epigrammist Martial, whose works extended from pornography to scathing political satire. Some of his lines are so quoted: "Live today, tomorrow will be too late." Others are timeless political commentary. "You'll always be poor if you're poor. These days, they only give wealth to the rich." Martial retired in Spain and wrote of the enjoyment of nature and the rural life. He said, "Give me a healthy native-born servant, a wife who is no prude, my nights blessed with sleep, and my days without litigation." For me, Martial captures the cosmopolitan Hispano-Roman, educated, witty, and yet grounded in the land of his birth. Spain, under the Romans, also welcomed immigrants from all over the empire. Among those who came were Jewish and Greek merchants who came to facilitate the long-distance trade to the east. After 70 CE, many more Jews came to Spain, escaping the wars in Jerusalem, during which the Second Temple was destroyed. From then on, there was a Jewish presence in the peninsula. Among those who fled from the Eastern Mediterranean were those who believed in the risen Christ. At the time, no one would have thought that this handful of believers in the Jesus movement would change the world, but they did. But that's a story for the next lecture.